The unseen guessed it was a cool October evening when David and his fiancée, Sarah, arrived at the remote Airbnb they had rented for the weekend. The house sat at the edge of the forest, miles away from the nearest town. It was a beautiful old Victorian house, recently renovated, with large bay windows and an inviting porch. As they parked their car, the crisp autumn air filled their lungs, and the house seemed peaceful, serene even, but there was something about it that felt off. The owner had left them a key in a small wooden box beside the door, with a note saying, "Enjoy your stay, and don't worry about the third floor door." David raised an eyebrow. "What do you think that means?" he asked, chuckling. Sarah shrugged. "Probably just a closet or something." They entered the house, marveling at how well kept it was despite its age. The floors creaked beneath their feet, but that was to be expected in a house this old. The living room was cozy, with a large fireplace, antique furniture, and bookshelves filled with old, dusty books. Everything seemed perfect for a quiet weekend away. The first night passed uneventfully. They spent it by the fireplace, sipping wine and laughing about the busy city lives. They slept soundly in the master bedroom, under thick blankets as the wind howled outside. But the second night was different. As they were preparing for bed, they heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps coming from above. Sarah froze. "Did you hear that?" David nodded. "Probably just the house settling. Old houses make noises, you know." But as the night wore on, the noises grew louder. At first, it was just footsteps, soft and deliberate, pacing back and forth above them. But then came the creaking, as if someone, or something, was dragging something heavy across the floor. They lay in bed, silent, both pretending to be asleep, but their hearts raced in their chests. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. "What if someone's up there?" she whispered. David sighed. "I'll go check. It's probably nothing." He grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the stairs. The third floor, the one the owner had warned him about, was supposed to be locked. But when David reached the door, it was slightly ajar. He hesitated. "Hello," he called out, but there was no response. The air felt heavier here, colder. Slowly, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was bare, except for an old chair sitting in the middle. Dust floated through the beam of his flashlight, and the walls seemed to breathe with a life of their own. But it was empty, just an old, forgotten room. Relieved, David turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, he felt it a cold breath on the back of his neck. He froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he turned around, shining his flashlight into the room again, but it was still empty. That night, they both tried to sleep, but every time they closed their eyes, they heard the footsteps, the dragging sound, and the faint, almost imperceptible whispering. It seemed to surround them, but whenever they turned on the lights, the house was still. The third day came, and they were both exhausted. Neither of them had slept, and the house felt darker now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on them. David wanted to leave, but Sarah insisted they stay one more night. "It's just a house," she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. But that night, everything changed. They were lying in bed, listening to the now familiar sounds above when suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, they thought it was over. But then, from the corner of the room, they heard it, a soft, raspy voice. "He's here." David shot up, grabbing the flashlight and shining it toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Sarah was trembling beside him, clutching the blankets. "We need to leave," she whispered. Before David could respond, the door to their bedroom creaked open, ever so slowly. They stared, paralyzed, as the door swung open wider, revealing nothing. The hallway beyond was empty, but the air was thick with the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, the footsteps started again, louder now, coming down the stairs. Something was coming toward them, slow and deliberate. David grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her out of bed. "We're leaving, now." They ran for the door, but as they reached the front hallway, they froze. Standing at the bottom of the staircase was a figure. Tall, gaunt, its face obscured by darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. David stepped back, pulling Sarah with him. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The figure tilted its head, as though considering his question, and then, in the same raspy voice they'd heard before, it whispered, "You." Without thinking, David grabbed Sarah and bolted for the door. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. The house loomed behind them, dark and silent once more. But as they sped down the long driveway, they both felt it, the house wasn't done with them. As they reached the edge of the forest, David glanced in the rearview mirror and gasped. There, standing at the window of the third floor, was the figure, watching them leave. They never spoke of what happened that weekend, but every so often, in the quiet of the night, David would wake up, heart racing, certain that he could hear the sound of footsteps coming from above. And somewhere, far away, in that old, forgotten house, the figure still waits. Waiting for someone new to arrive, waiting for its next guest. This story is filled with tension, building slowly with a mysterious atmosphere, and a haunting figure that remains largely unseen until the final, terrifying reveal. It plays on isolation, the unknown, and the fear of being watched, which makes it both suspenseful and unsettling.